So today we're going to finish up our series called The Strangest Sight on Exodus 3 about how a perfect God fights for imperfect people. And I want to start by asking you a question. Have you ever been up against an impossible situation? I think we all have in some way. I remember July 4th, because it was a holiday, 4th of July 2019. I remember sitting out on our deck at the house we lived in. We were in Colorado at the time. And sitting on the floor of the deck with my knees up in front of me, just leaning back on the house and just thinking there was no way out. It just felt like everything that I was doing in my life was not going the way that I had hoped, the way that I had planned. I felt like I was failing as a dad, failing as a husband, failing as a pastor at the church that I was at, failing as a student because I was in school as I still am, so that's super fun. But it just felt like nothing was quite going right, and I just started to think, there's no way out of this. God, would all of this stuff just be better if I wasn't here? And that question, admission in a sense, was what started a process of probably about a year of just healing. And I needed people, I needed support, I needed community, I needed grace. The church that I was at gave me kind of a mini break, a mini sabbatical of a couple of weeks just to kind of figure out what's going on in my head, what's going on in my heart. Counseling, therapy, people around me. I needed strength that I didn't have. It just felt like an absolutely impossible situation. And so today, we're going to talk about how to do the impossible. And actually, more accurately, we're going to talk about how to let God do the impossible one step at a time. And how he loves to use us as he does that. How he loves to make us a part of his plan when he does the impossible. So we'll look at the last 5 verses of Exodus chapter 3 this morning. And just as a quick recap to catch you up on where we've been and kind of where we're headed. God has met Moses in the wilderness. Moses was tending sheep. And God shows up in this burning bush. And he says, Moses, you're going to go back to my people who are enslaved in Egypt. You're going to go to Pharaoh and you're going to lead my people out of slavery. And Moses says, well, wait a second. Who am I that I'm going to do this? And God says, no. Now, who are you? He says, I am. And God says, it's not about who you are, but about who I am. And then Moses says, well, when I go back, who am I supposed to tell him sent me? And God goes, you're going to tell him that I am sent you. That's my name. You're going to go and tell them who sent you, because it's not about what you're going to do. It's about what I'm going to do and what I'm going to do in you and through you. And so Moses, at this point, he keeps thinking about himself. This was just kind of the first 2 excuses and questions that Moses asked. If we were to keep going through Exodus 4 and 5, we'd see 3 more questions or excuses that Moses makes. And it kind of really keeps happening over the next several years. Moses keeps thinking about himself and trying to get himself out of this situation, this kind of impossible call that God has given him. But God keeps trying to change his perspective and say, no, don't focus on you, focus on me. God tells Moses about himself over and over and over, and he looks at Moses and says, you are just going to have to trust me. And so that's where we kind of pick up in Exodus chapter 3. I'll read verses 18 to 22, and so you can listen as I read them, and then we'll have them on the screen. And this is everything that I read this morning is God talking to Moses. So this is what God says. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not leave empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. God is sharing his plan with Moses. He's saying, this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. He's about to do something that everybody thought was impossible. And so this is where we pick up, right back in verse 18. We'll have them on the screen now to follow along. the elders of Israel will listen to you. Remember, God said you're going to go to the elders. And he says, well, who am I supposed to say sent me? So God says, the elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. Before I talk about kind of the highlighted things on this slide, I want to focus in on the last sentence. This kind of seems like maybe a little fib that God is trying to pull here. Maybe a little white lie or an all-out, flat-out lie. Remember, he's sending Moses back to free the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. He says, go to Pharaoh and say, let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. So what is really happening here? In the ancient Near Eastern culture, it was customary, it was polite. When you were asking for a favor, when you were asking for something, you would start very small. And then you would kind of see how much you could get. And we've done this too. When we think about it this way, you've asked this question or had somebody ask this question at work or anywhere, at school. Hey, do you have a second? Can I get a minute of your time? Do you have just a minute? What it doesn't actually mean, like, I want to talk to you for 60 seconds and then cut off and I'll see you next time. It means, hey, I need to talk to you for an indefinite, unspecified amount of time. So the Israelites are really saying, hey, Pharaoh, we're going to go for as long as we want to. And we're going to go into the wilderness. We're saying, Pharaoh, we're going to get away from your domain. We're going to get away from your dominion, the area that you rule over. We're going to get out of Egypt. And we're going to be in the wilderness where you don't really have a say in what's happening. You don't have authority there. And then, we're not just going to the wilderness, we're going to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. So Pharaoh, you're considered a god by your people. You're the most powerful person on the planet at this time. And if you're not considered a god, at least people look at you and say, well, you're kind of you have this pre-god status. When you die, you will become a deity. You'll become a god. But we're not really going to recognize that anymore. We're going to go and worship the Lord our God. So by worshiping, by offering sacrifices to the Lord our God, we're saying, no, we don't actually recognize your lordship or your authority over us anymore. So you can kind of see how this is not really the Israelites asking to go for 3 days in the wilderness to offer sacrifices. This is the Israelites saying, hey, Pharaoh, we're out of Egypt. Peace out. We're not coming back. See you never again. We got to understand that that's actually what's happening. Pharaoh would understand this as someone who lived in that culture. It takes a little bit of explaining for us, but he would know this. When they're saying, we're out, we're not coming back, this is a big ask. God is sending Moses into an impossible situation. Because what ruler in his right mind, the most powerful ruler on earth, is going to say, yes, this nation of slaves that we have had in our country for 400 years, sure, just go ahead and walk out. Who's going to say that? It's an impossible task, but Moses doesn't have to do it alone. Remember back in verse 10, when God is talking with Moses, kind of when the conversation just started, God tells Moses what he's going to do. I'm going to free my people from Egypt. I see what's happening. I see their suffering. I see the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. And then in verse 10, God says, so now you go, Moses, to Pharaoh. But who's going now? Who does God say? Because the elders of Israel are going to listen to you, and then you and the elders are going to go to the king of Egypt. You're all going to go together. It's a tough situation, but you're going to have people around you. And there's even more proof of this. This is a little bit sneaky. That's why I highlighted it. The elders are supposed to go to king of Egypt and say, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. But wait, who did God actually meet with? Who's he talking to right now? He's talking to Moses. Where are the elders of Israel? They're not here. Is this another lie that God is trying to get him to say to Pharaoh? Well, he says that the elders are going to listen to Moses. So he's saying they're going to accept you. They're not going to send you away. They're not going to ridicule you. They're not going to beat you, kill you. They're going to receive you as their representative. So in a representative sense, God has met with us. They can truly say that because God, our representative, God has met with Moses, our representative. God has met with us. So a perfect God fights for imperfect people by giving us community. He puts a community of people around us. God placed people around Moses that were going to go into the situation with him. He wasn't alone, and neither are we. God puts a community around us. And this isn't even the best part. I mean, people are great. I'm an introvert and I love people. People are great, but this is not the best part of the community that God sets around us. Look at what God said they're supposed to say his name as. The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. This doesn't seem like a big deal. So why am I making a big deal out of it? God could have sent the elders of Israel to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and had them say, tell them that the Lord, the God of the Israelites. The name Israel came from Jacob when God changed his name, so it's kind of like children of a promise from God. You could have said, the God of the Israelites has met with us. They could have said, hey, the Lord, the God of the universe, the creator of everything has met with us. This powerful God has met with us. Instead, he wants them to say, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Why is this a big deal? Because Pharaoh looks at the Hebrews, which, by the way, like I said, Israel comes from the name that God gave Jacob. So they're the Israelites. They called themselves the Israelites because of tracing their lineage back to one person. Other nations, other peoples would look at them as the Hebrews. That was more like an ethnicity. So they're the same group of people, two different names, kind of coming from two different points of view. But why does God say the God of the Hebrews? Tell Pharaoh the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Pharaoh looks at the Hebrews as a conquered nation of slaves. He's defeated them. He has power over them. He's got rule over them. He is oppressing them. But God identifies with them in that place. God, in all of his power and his glory, identifies with the lowly and oppressed. He's saying, so you go tell Pharaoh that the God of the Hebrews has met with you. To the most powerful person on earth at the time. The one with the most riches, the wealthiest, the one with the most slaves, the biggest kingdom, the most stuff. Tell him the God of the Hebrews has met with you. No matter what your situation is, no matter how messy it seems, no matter how weak or powerless you feel, God is not ashamed to identify with you in that place. He's not ashamed to sit in the mud and the muck with you and be part of your community. He's called you his own, and so he comes into that place with us. He's not ashamed no matter how weak or powerless we feel. He gives us community, and then he sticks around to be a part of it with us. A perfect God fights for imperfect people by giving us community. And then watch what he does in 20. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand. I'm going to be that hand that compels him. And strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he's going to let you go. It's funny, a little bit ironic, a little bit, I feel bad for Moses, that God is telling him, go do this thing, go to Pharaoh, and by the way, it's not going to work. Go tell him to let my people go, and he's not going to listen to you unless a mighty hand compels him. But God is not leaving him in a place of failure. He's not leaving him in the impossible situation. He says, no, I'm going to intervene. It's going to take a mighty hand, but that's going to be my mighty hand. I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to intervene, and I'm going to be the hand that convinces Pharaoh. So what's your impossible situation? God knows that there are obstacles for you on the way out of your Egypt, whatever that is. He knows that it's going to be hard. He knows that there's going to be bumps in the road. There's going to be hurdles and obstacles and hardships. But he's already got a plan for them. It's his mighty hand that delivers. See, we're not responsible to do the impossible. What God asks of us is to just take a step. The next step might be the first step. Take a step and leave the impossible to him. That's our role. Take a step and leave the impossible to God. Because God says, I'm going to open the door, and Israel, you're going to walk out through it. I'm going to make a way. You just have to trust me enough to take the next step. And can you really blame Moses for being a little bit skeptical of what God is saying and for asking a few questions? I mean, it's an impossible situation that God's setting him into. By our standards, in our terms, it's an impossible situation. Pharaoh's not going to listen. He's not going to do anything. And I think Moses is just like having his mind blown. Because what he's hearing from God is that this nation of slaves who are conquered, who have nothing, who are being oppressed, are going to walk out with no opposition. It's too good to be true. Right? And maybe we've heard promises like that from God in our lives, or maybe we haven't, but we all face this situation where maybe the outcome is too good to be true. We face these impossible situations. We don't see the way out. We're not sure what to do next. We all have things like this. And when we can't see the end result, we get paralyzed, and so we don't take any steps at all. When we don't see where the outcome of a situation, when we're not sure which way we're going to get out of the wet paper bag we got ourselves stuck in, we're afraid to even take one step. We get paralyzed. What if that's the wrong way? What if it's not right? What if I then have to turn around and go back this way? We get paralyzed because we want to see the whole thing. But God says, no. You need to trust me enough to take the next step and leave the impossible to me. It's like climbing a mountain. The first ever mountain, 14er, these are the mountains that are over 14,000 feet. Over a couple of summers in Colorado, I hiked, maybe 8 or 10 of them. And the first one I ever did was really dumb. I don't recommend ever doing this one for your first one, but it's Mount Evans. And so this is a picture from the trail head where you start hiking to Mount Evans. And you see a couple of the tall peaks there. The biggest ones you can see are the Sawtooth and Mount Beersat, which is another 14er. It's like 14,165, something like that. But this is the trailhead of Mount Evans. What's the problem? From the beginning of the trail to Mount Evans, you can't see Mount Evans. If I was by myself, I probably would have been like, absolutely not. I don't know where I'm going. This is ridiculous. I'm going to get lost. We did a little bit, but it was okay. This isn't even the trail we took. We actually went way further out to the left, which is north, and came up kind of over this ridge and then down this way. And so we couldn't see where we were going from the start. And then we get up there, and you can see, right here, that trail, that's this gully coming up here. And so we get up there, and we're like, okay, we got to skirt around the edge of this bowl. You don't want to lose elevation. You don't want to go down, so you skirt around the edge, which takes a little bit longer, but it's much easier. And I'm like, oh, check out that, like the peaks out there. I see the summit. You see that big rock. And this guy, Jim, that was with us, we called him the Sherpa. He was like, no. Let's just keep going. So we get up kind of next to it, and he goes, yeah, that looks like it. That's actually the summit of a different mountain. I don't even remember the name of this one. But he's like, see where that guy is up there? That's where we're headed. And then we go up over these big rocks, and we get up to where that guy is, and I'm like, all right, we got to be getting close. We're almost there. He's like, no. We got to go all the way around the south ridge of the mountain. So you're walking around this, and literally, there's an alpine lake below you that's called Abyss Lake. So you're walking around the side of a mountain, trying not to fall into the abyss. And you get over that ridge in the distance there, and then you're like, all right, we got to be almost there. And then you're like, okay, we can see the summit. Finally, after all those steps, after not being able to see it for so long, just seeing landmarks along the way, we can finally see it. And the thing is, it looks pretty close in this picture. It's really not, because look at this. You see this little blip right here? That's a person. We've still got a pretty long walk to go. And we eventually made it to the top. Here we go. That's Jim, the Sherpa on the right. And my boss and pastor at the time, Joshua, in the middle. If I didn't have the community, if I didn't have somebody who had some experience, if I was on my own, I never would have taken the first step. Without community, without knowing where I was going, without being able to see Mount Evans from the Mount Evans trailhead, I would have ended up in the wrong spot. It was an impossible situation. And yet, as I went up the trail, then I could see the next landmark. And as I went a little further and went over that next ridge, then I could see the next landmark. And eventually I could see the summit. From the trailhead, it's an impossible situation. You can't see your way out of the situation. You can't see your way to the top. But you got to just keep taking steps. And then you can see the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And if we can trust the trails, if we can trust the landmarks on the way that say, hey, you're headed the right direction, how much more can we trust the one who created the whole dang mountain? And says, just take a step. I'm going to show you the way. I'm going to do the impossible. Your job is just trust me and take a step. Leave the impossible to me. So it's time to take the next step for us, for you, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's the first step for you. It's time to take the first step, whether that is out of Egypt, out of your impossible situation toward God, or maybe that's you're in a place where you're like, no, actually my life is pretty good right now. I'm feeling pretty good. Everything's kind of okay. No big problems, no major obstacles. Maybe you don't feel like you have this impossible situation. Maybe your next step is back towards somebody else's Egypt. Back towards somebody else's impossible situation to help them out of it and into a relationship with Jesus. It's time to take our next step. And we can do that with confidence. And here's why. Here's what God says in 21 and 22. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold, and for clothing which you will put on your sons and daughters. And so you will plunder the Egyptians. The Israelites were slaves. They didn't have anything. And God's like, you're going to leave your captivity, and you're going to have to walk through the wilderness to get to the land that I'm promising you. They didn't have any supplies for it. They didn't have anything. But God says, I'm going to save you, and I'm going to provide for you. I'm the one that's going to make provision for everything that you need. God saves with abundance. Not like with just enough so that you can squeak by. He saves with abundance. The ones who were persecuting the Israelites, who had them enslaved, who were abusing them and oppressing them and overworking them and beating them, are the ones that they're going to go and ask, hey, can I have a bunch of your nicest stuff on our way out? And they're going to provide for their need. God's like, you're going to do something ridiculous and impossible. Who would say yes to their slave leaving and give them all their stuff with them? When it says, ask all of the women living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, it wasn't that the Israelites owned their own house. It's that they were household slaves. God says, you're going to go and ask your master and your mistress for all of their stuff, and it's going to work. They're going to give it to you, and you're going to carry it out of Egypt. And not only that, you're going to put it on your sons and your daughters. God is dressing up a gang of tiny human Israelites to walk out of Egypt with all the Egyptians' ice and baggy clothes hanging off them and saggy pants and all that stuff. And it's not the Kirkland brand Costco pants. It's the good stuff. It's the Gucci, the Armani, the Tiffany, the Rolex. I have to throw in the Rolex because all the guys don't know the other brands. But God's saying it's going to work. You're going to ask and it's going to work. I hate packing. I packed last night for our Thanksgiving family visit. What I should have done is sent Joel into the closet and just said, pick anything you want and put it on, and you're going to be my walking suitcase. This is what God says to do. He's got a little Israelite army with all the Egyptians stuff. And this word plunder, this was a word that was used for armies that would conquer a city. And when they would defeat it, they would go in and take whatever the heck they wanted. The finest stuff, the silver, the gold, the jewels, the everything. The livestock. God says, I'm going to defeat your oppressors. And you're going to walk out with all the finest stuff. I'm going to fight the battle. I'm going to do the impossible. You just have to take the steps along the way. But does anyone else find it odd? I find it really odd that God says, you're going to walk through the wilderness. You're going to go to the promised land. And you're going to ask the people for silver and gold and fine clothes. Not water, not food, not supplies, no provisions. You're going to ask them for the finest stuff. Why is that? If we keep reading through Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, the next few books in the Bible, we see that God's going to provide for those things in other miraculous ways. He's going to provide them food in the wilderness. He's going to provide water for them. He's going to provide everything that they need. So that's probably one reason that he says you're going to take the good stuff with you. I think another reason, and even a more important reason, remember back when God first said you're going to go. And his assurance, his promise to Moses was, when you go, Israel is going to come and worship God on this mountain. They were going to set up a tabernacle, like a portable tent that would be their place of worship. And a tent of meeting where they would gather. They were going to worship God in community. And then God would give them sort of these regulations and things that they were supposed to do to have a proper order of worship. And you know what that involved? Articles of silver and gold and cups and plates and bowls. He's saying, I'm going to provide for you everything that you need to actively pursue a relationship with me because we're a community together. You are a community, Israel, and I'm part of your community. I am your God. He's given them everything they need to be together in community with him. And the good news is we don't need silver and gold anymore to worship God. We don't need fine clothing. We just need Jesus. God's given us the riches of his love and his mercy and grace through Jesus. So how much more can we trust God to take the next step? Because we don't need the fine articles of silver and gold. We need Jesus. We can trust him to take the next step out of the impossible situation or back into somebody else's impossible situation to help them out. God saves with abundance and he does the impossible. So here's our biggest takeaway for this morning. If God saves with abundance and he does the impossible, we're going to ask for what we need, but focus on what God has. Ask for what you need, but focus on what God has. It's legitimate to have needs. We have human needs for things like, shelter and clothing and food and water. I think God created us for community. That is another legitimate need. Ask God for what you need, but focus on what he has. In other words, don't be controlled by the things you don't have. Don't act according to what is already in your back pocket. Act according to what God has, because he has everything you need in abundance. Ask for what you need, but focus on what God has. Because we're all up against something impossible. We're all up against something where we look around and we say, I don't have enough to do this thing. Maybe it's a sickness where you can't get back up on your feet, or grief where you just don't know how to get out of it, or you lost a job and can't provide, or you have a fear to take the next step, or you have this hurt, this pain that you just can't get over, or anxiety, depression that just controls your addiction, that wrecks your body, your mind, your soul. This relationship that's broken and I just can't see a way to fix it. If you need peace, he's got it, and it passes understanding. If you need calm, he's got a quiet place, a holy place set aside to meet with you. Community. If you need community, here we are, and here he is. He's with us. If you need mercy, he has it in abundance. If you need grace, he gave it to us freely by his own blood. If you need a way out, he's a way maker. He parts the sea so we can walk through it. If you need joy, he's got the joy of salvation. He is full of love if that's what you need. He's abounding in it. He's got self-control if you need it. If you need provision, he is the provider. If you need strength, he's got it. If you need vision for your life, he's got a purpose for you. We all face these impossible situations, and we face the impossibility of perfecting ourselves before a perfect God. Trying to make ourselves right with him. Trying to measure up to the standard of perfection. But here's the thing. He's a perfect God fighting for imperfect people. Perfect God fights for imperfect people by doing the impossible. We couldn't measure up on our own. But he does it. He fights for imperfect people, and he doesn't do it out of obligation. He does it out of his goodness. He does it out of his love. A perfect God is perfect in goodness. And that's why he fights for us. He says, I'm going to show you. I'm going to hold nothing back to show you how good I am. Not even my own son. That's why I came to you, Israel. That's why I'm here with you. That's why I'm going to bring you out of Egypt, your impossible situation where you've been for 400 years. That's why I'm going to keep every promise that I've made to you. That's why I'm going to save you with abundance. And Exodus 3 is just the beginning of the story. The story is still happening today. We still live in a time of God's redemption. God is redeeming. He's making all things new. He is making all things right. And so today I think this is what he would say to each of us. If he was standing here physically in this room, I think he would say, I'm good. That's why I'm here. That's why I came to you. That's why I didn't hold back even my own son. That's why I came to you as God in the flesh. That's why I love you. That's why I care for you. That's why I'm with you. That's why your mess is my mess. I've made it my own. I've made you my own. That's why I have a plan. That's why you're part of it. And that's why I want to deliver you. I want to redeem you. I want to show you my favor. I want to make those other people maybe in your impossible situation, like he said to Israel, I want to make them favorably disposed towards you. This is the bondage that you're living in. I came to bust you out of it. I'm here to bless you, and I'm not going to stop at blessing you, because here's the thing. I'm going to bless you so that you will be a blessing to everybody else around you that I'm going to bless. So what's your impossible situation? He's a perfect God, and he fights for imperfect people by doing the impossible. Whatever our situation is, whatever your impossible place is, whatever your Egypt is, he wants to save you with abundance. He wants you to trust him. He says, just trust me. Take the first step. I've got a plan, and I can't wait to show you what that plan is. This is how he fights for us. He does the impossible.